and I will work and get Neil on board, okay? Just as an FYI. All right, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. We're pleased to have you back for the next in our NASEO Financing Committee call series. We're looking forward to having a good discussion with you today. We've got some great speakers lined up for you to talk about Treasury's direct pay. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to the NASEO Financing Committee co-chairs, Eddie Trevino with Texas and Robin Boyle with Montana, to help us kick things off and introduce the speakers here.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eddie Trevino. I'm the director of the State Energy Conservation Office in Texas. And I'm excited about this financing committee call because this is a subject that I have very little institutional knowledge on. So like you, I'm going to be listening to all the details and asking a lot of questions. And Robin, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Eddie. I am also very excited. So I'm Robin Boyle. I'm with the State Energy Office in Montana. This is, with everything else that's been going on, I have to admit that we haven't really touched on this yet. So this call will be great for us as well. I know everybody's going to be excited to hear about what you guys have to say and your expertise. That being said, I'll introduce our speakers really quickly. We have Amber McKenzie, Attorney Advisor from the Office of Tax Policy and U.S. Treasury. Ian Goldsmith, Research Analyst for the U.S. Energy Team, World Resources Institute. And we have Neil Skyver, President.
Good job, Skyver, yeah.
Skyver, sorry about that. Neil Skyver, President, LVL Finance, LLC. And so Amber's going to kick us off. Just a reminder to you guys that if you have questions along the way, to put them in the chat box, please.
Thanks, Robin. Let me just see if I can share my screen here. You guys seeing my slides?
We're seeing it.
Full screen mode. Perfect. So my name is Amber McKenzie. I'm an attorney advisor in Treasury's Department Office of Tax Policy, and I helped work on these regulations. I'm going to start off real quick with a level set, then step back and kind of talk about the context of the Inflation Reduction Act. And then I'll get right into how elective pay works and how your organization can access it. As I'm sure you're all aware, the regulations we are talking about today are proposed and temporary regulations. So under the Administrative Procedure Act, we propose regulations, which is called notice. Then the public and private sector have the opportunity to provide feedback, which is called comment. And then we take into account all those comments in drafting the final regulations. So the rules we proposed back in June may change slightly based on the feedback. It's a 60-day comment period. It's still open. You have until August 14th. So I highly encourage you, if you have comments already, or you think of comments based on what I say today, or as you continue to think about this exciting provision and make plans to take advantage of it, please do submit a comment. We read and consider every single comment in formulating the final regulations. And it's not on this slide, but I also wanted to mention there's going to be a public hearing on the proposed regulations. It's on August 21st at 10 a.m. I'd love to see you there. It's in person and there's a virtual option. And all the details about how to submit comments or how to speak at or attend the public hearing are found in the preamble to the proposed regulations. I also need to say that this presentation relies on simplifications and generalizations to convey high-level points. So please refer to the actual regulations to look for more detailed information. And unfortunately, I will not be able to provide substantive information beyond what is in the proposed and temporary regulations, nor will I be able to comment on opinions, interpretations, or specific taxpayer-related questions. So the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law on August 16th of last year. It makes a historic commitment to build a new clean energy economy and to be an engine for growth. And this is the largest investment in clean energy in the United States history. Nearly 3/4 of the IRA's projected investment in addressing climate change is delivered through tax incentives, so it's a big deal for the service. And many of the clean tax energy provisions offer bonus credits to projects that are located in low-income communities or energy communities, pay prevailing wages, and use registered apprentices, or meet certain domestic content requirements. One of the provisions found in the Inflation Reduction Act is elective pay, and this is a novel tax credit monetization mechanism that allows state, local, and tribal governments tax-exempt entities and some businesses to receive tax incentives as direct payments for the first time. And I'm going to be focusing on elective pay today. This slide talks about our clean energy implementation activities, which have already included quickly developing and issuing tax guidance, like the proposed regulations, working with the IRS to put in place modern streamlined processes to allow taxpayers to claim the credits, and conducting stakeholder engagement outreach to inform our approach and educate the public about the benefits that are now available, like this webinar today. Just wanted to highlight the excitement around elective pay with a quote from Secretary Yellen. She called elective pay a catalyst and a force multiplier because it significantly expands the range of actors undertaking clean energy investments. And it also significantly expands the range of projects and communities receiving associated benefits through the tax code. She said, more clean energy projects will be built quickly and affordably, and more communities will benefit from the growth of the clean energy economy. So as I said before, and it bears repeating, elective pay allows tax-exempt and governmental entities that do not owe federal income taxes to, for the first time, be able to receive a payment equal to the full value of the tax credit for building qualifying clean energy projects or making qualifying investments. And unlike competitive grant and loan programs in which applicants may not receive an award, any applicable entity can receive a tax-free cash payment as long as they meet the requirements for both elective pay and the underlying credit. Applicable entities can use the elective pay for any of the 12 Inflation Reduction Act credits listed therein. So who's an applicable entity? Under the proposed rules, applicable entities for elective pay would include the specific entities listed on this slide, and you will see that they include the states, the District of Columbia, and their political subdivisions, which includes local governments like cities and counties. It also includes agencies and instrumentalities of state, local, and tribal governments, which includes entities like water districts, school districts, economic development agencies, and public universities and hospitals that are agencies and instrumentalities. The next 3 slides go over the 12 credits that are eligible for direct pay, as well as bonus credit amounts that apply to many of the credits. I know these slides can be a little bit hard to read, but there's information on irs.gov, and you can search for publication 5817G, which is here in the footnote, if you want a bigger copy. So on this first slide, we have 6 credits dealing with energy generation and carbon capture. Elective pay applies to the major production tax credit, section 45, and the major investment tax credit, section 48, and their energy neutral successor credits. It also applies to zero emission nuclear power plants and carbon oxide sequestration. And someone threw in here, and it warrants a special focus, the low income communities bonus that some section 48 projects may qualify for. This slide goes through the other 6 credits, 2 for manufacturing, 2 for vehicles, and 2 for fuels. I've heard a lot of interest from government entities about the credit for clean commercial vehicles, as well as the credit for the fueling station for those vehicles, the alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit. Those are those charging stations, but I would love to hear more from you guys about which credits particularly interest you, if you have any questions or comments on that. So as I mentioned before, there are certain requirements and bonuses that might affect the amount of elective pay for the credits. So first, the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement applies to 10 of the credits. It applies to everything except 45W and 45X. And if you meet this credit, it increases the base credit amount by 5 times. Domestic content can provide a 10% increase for 48 or 48E and a 10 percentage point increase to 45 or 45Y. And in future years, if you don't meet it, it can also provide a haircut to the elective pay amount. That doesn't apply yet. Energy communities bonus, projects located in energy communities are also eligible for 10% increase to 48 or 48E and 10 percentage point increase for 45 or 45W. And then, as I mentioned on the other slide, there's a low income communities bonus credit under section 48, paragraph E. It can provide for an additional 10 or even 20 bonus points for certain solar and wind facilities located in low income communities and certain other communities. And this bonus is an allocated one, so you have to apply for it and get a credit allocation and place your facility in service before you can claim the credit. So this slide is often the most interesting for people. How do I get the money? So this slide is the steps, although they don't necessarily have to apply in this order. So obviously, first you need to identify and pursue the qualifying credit or activity. You need to know what applicable credit you intend to earn and use elective pay for. Once you've determined that the project makes sense for your organization, you would complete your project and put it into service. Then you must determine your tax year, if you don't already know it, to determine when your tax return will be due. And so the 12 credits eligible for elective pay are generally based on the tax year the project is placed into service or the amount of energy generated and sold during the tax year. So your tax year is very important information that might help you plan for when you want to complete your project and place it into service. The rest of the slide is what the IRS needs to know. So you must complete a pre-filing registration process with the IRS. This will include the credit you intend to earn and the property you intend to use to earn it, along with other information which is described in the proposed and temporary regulations. And upon completing the process, the IRS will provide you with a registration number for each applicable credit property. Then you make the elective pay election on a tax return that you file with the IRS. This return can be filed as early as the due date for the return, which is generally a few months after the end of your taxable year, or as late as the extended due date for that return, which is 6 months later. And you will need to provide the registration number you got during the pre-filing registration process on your return. Then the IRS will process your return and you will receive a payment, assuming you qualify. So here we have a hypothetical project for a local government claiming elective pay. This example assumes the entity is a calendar year taxpayer. That's called the government Smallville. And because Smallville is a government, the proposed regulations specify that they should file a Form 990T with the IRS to claim the credit. So the Form 990T is due the 15th day of the 5th month after the end of the tax year. So in Smallville's case, it's due May 15th. So Smallville identifies a project that qualifies for the Section 48 investment tax credit. Let's call it a geothermal tax heat pump, and it places that heat pump into service in 2023. So in late 2023 or early 2024, Smallville completes the pre-filing registration process with the IRS and receives a registration number for its heat pump. Then on May 15th, 2024, Smallville files its Form 990T. And then after this, the IRS processes the return and sends Smallville a refund payment in the amount of the credit for the heat pump. I wanted to highlight a special rule in the proposed regulations that enables entities to combine grants and forgivable loans with tax credits. So it says if an investment-related credit property is funded by a tax-free grant or forgivable loan, entities can get the same value of the eligible tax credit as if the investment were financed with taxable funds. The only caveat is that the amount of the credit plus restricted tax-exempt amounts cannot exceed the cost of the investment. So we have an example here to illustrate. Under Section 45W, clean commercial vehicles that weigh over 14,000 pounds can qualify for a tax credit that maxes out at $40,000. So let's pretend we have an electric school bus that qualifies for the $40,000 credit and it costs $400,000 to buy. The school district might receive a tax-exempt grant in the amount of $300,000 to purchase the bus. If the school district purchases the bus using the grant plus $100,000 of its unrestricted funds, the school district's basis in the bus is $400,000 and the school district Section 45W credit is $40,000. And then just to check, since the $300,000 restricted tax-exempt grant plus the $40,000 tax credit is less than the cost of the electric bus, there's no need to reduce the credit to get the entire $40,000. So while this example uses a school district as the applicable entity and uses the commercial clean vehicle credit as the applicable tax credit, the special rule applies to other applicable entities and other applicable tax credits. So there's more examples and more information in the proposed regulations. So you can find a lot more information in the latest guidance related to the Inflation Reduction Act's tax provisions on irs.gov/clean energy or irs.gov/elective payment. Or elective pay, sorry, and we will have additional webinars and opportunities for stakeholder involvement. So thank you for the chance to share more about where we're at. It's an exciting moment and an important one.
Thanks, Amber. So Ian, let's go immediately to you.
All right. Let's get into it. Let me just share my screen. There we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Goldsmith. I am a research analyst at the World Resources Institute with the U.S. Energy team. I joined WRI in September of 2022. And so because of that, a lot of my work has been focused on IRA and in particular elective pay. And so today I'm going to be speaking to you guys about the impact of this mechanism on MUSH building financing mechanism. So where Amber just did a great presentation talking about the mechanics and exactly what elective pay is, I'm going to go a little deeper into what this means in particular for this mechanism. So before we start, just kind of want to introduce that WRI is actually developing a what we're calling an IRA roadmap in partnership with the Bloomberg Philanthropies as well as the local infrastructure hub. We're developing a handbook roadmap for the IRA for local governments with a focus on local governments in particular, but useful for any direct pay, electric pay eligible entity. And so we're outlining strategies for local governments to leverage IRA opportunities, particularly tax credits for clean energy deployment, and that is going to be released sometime in September. So look out for that. And a lot of the research and work that has been done for that roadmap so far is informing this, this presentation. So with that out of the way, I want to start by re-emphasizing the opportunity here. IRA was a massive funding opportunity for climate and clean energy, and estimated around $370 billion for climate and clean energy. And as Amber mentioned, around 70%, 75% of that funding is in the form of tax credits. And in previous years, in previous rounds of this type of work, this would have been a really, really big issue for the MUSH market, given that tax-exempt entities generally don't get tax credits. But now with elective pay, suddenly this whole pot of funding that's potentially uncapped, and that represents a majority of the funding possible through this bill, through this incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, is suddenly now available to MUSH market. And so the reason why we're spending the time here to talk about this is because there is so much on the table and so much opportunity for public entities to be able to fund renewable energy, clean vehicles, and do this work in a way that was just not possible before. So as Amber mentioned, there are 12 tax credits that are eligible for elective pay, but I'm going to go out on a lark here and say not all of these tax credits are going to be directly relevant or most relevant for the MUSH market. And so I've highlighted the ones that are probably going to be most relevant and that I'm going to speak to the most, which are the production and investment tax credits, both their current forms as well as their clean electricity forms, which will be coming in 2025. As well as the commercial clean vehicle and alternative fuel refueling property credit. These are the ones that, given what's out there and what folks have experience with, are probably going to be the most relevant. If one of you perchance is really interested in putting a nuclear power plant, in a MUSH financing thing, all the power to you. But I imagine that's probably not going to be the case for most folks. So we're going to focus on kind of this set and as we're thinking about this. So now that we have kind of a little bit more of a scope of what we're talking about, what is the actual impact? What can we look to? Well, we don't direct pay was we've just seen guidance for it, so there's still a lot of unknowns about this. But what I personally think is going to be the biggest significant impacts are these three big things. So firstly, elective pay expands the realm of what technologies are accessible and affordable for MUSH entities to implement. Secondly, elective pay incentivizes the direct ownership of eligible infrastructure and disrupts, although it doesn't destroy, many traditional aspects of traditional MUSH financing mechanisms. And finally, elective pay gives MUSH actors greater leverage and options in their procurement and in negotiating these deals. So the first part, expanding the realm of what's possible. Traditionally, MUSH building financing mechanisms have been focused on energy efficiency. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of times, energy efficiency is almost a low-hanging fruit of energy conservation measures. They don't exist and are easier to deal with in terms of building maintenance. They're more familiar and potentially even less expensive a lot of the time than installing generation. But elective pay tax credits really do not apply to most energy efficiency technologies. There's only a limited set of energy efficiency technologies that will qualify. The most notable one is geothermal heat pumps through the Section 48 ITC. There's also solar water heaters, as well as cogeneration facilities. But in reality, a lot of the standard traditional energy efficiency measures that make up a lot of MUSH energy financing, your audits, your lighting, HVAC systems, those are not covered by electric pay. What it does cover are things that have been used in the MUSH market before, but have been in more of an advanced or less standard options. So namely, distributed energy resources like solar PV, storage, small wind, microgrids, and clean vehicles. So what's really interesting about this opportunity is that it expands what's possible. So by providing these savings on these technologies, it gives the opportunity for the market to better integrate things like distributed energy generation, EVs, EV charging equipment into the market. So rather than necessarily making what already exists, affecting what already exists. So, and the way it does this is by making capital stretch farther. So as we heard from Amber, under elective pay rules, tax-exempt grants and forgivable loans do not reduce the basis for investment tax credits. So what this means is that any capital, particularly public capital, can go a lot farther or significantly farther than it went before. And to kind of illustrate this, I have an example here. Chose Cohoes, New York, because I like upstate New York, and we've worked with Cohoes before. But if we think about a hypothetical solar installation worth $100,000, right? What we can see here is that in the context of direct pay, the elective pay refund takes up a lot of the net value for a project. So if we think about the value of a capital from a state RLF loan, for example, in net, the impact of a $90,000 loan without elective pay can be the same as a $60,000 loan with elective pay. So the way this happens is that capital stretches farther. So yeah, so this is really what we're talking about when it means when it stretches farther. So okay, so we know that this expands the realm of what's possible. How do we think of this in terms of traditional MUSH market financing mechanisms, particularly ESPCs, which have been widely used? Well, the big challenge here is that elective pay requires the direct ownership of an asset to claim. Leases and PPAs do not count for direct pay. And so this throws an interesting wrench into a lot of traditional MUSH financing mechanisms, because a lot of them are based on leases, third-party ownership. In ESPCs, ESAs are predicated on these concepts. Tax-exempt lease purchasing agreements are based on this third-party ownership contract. But elective pay requires direct ownership. so what this means is that if you're thinking about a traditional ESPC, traditional ESA, traditional deals in the space, MUSH entities have to either finance these things up front or work out an ownership deal with whoever they're interested, or whoever they're working with. And that exposes MUSH operators to some more risk than these structures have been used for, than they've been advertised and promulgated as, and might require more in-house energy knowledge to deal with operations, to deal with figuring out whether elective pay is a good deal or not. And so it complicates, elective pay really does, it complicates the use of these third-party ownership structures and increases the importance of upfront as well as bridge capital, because you need to make some costs at least to incur an election. And so to kind of illustrate this point, we have a handy graph here kind of illustrating the most simple form of an ESPC, and also shout out to Sam Kramer for actually writing and making this graph so that I can use it here. So if we think about the traditional ESPC and the way that, you know, capital flows and how we see how the structure works, where direct pay throws a wrench into things is here. So where we would normally see the ESCO or the bank be owners of this project and hosts would be leasing, right? That no longer works if you're thinking of elective pay. If you want to use this mechanism, the ownership has to fall on the host somehow. Now, you may be thinking this completely blows up the whole structure. This is like a revolutionary change that might make it impossible to use ESPCs, to use these things for elective pay eligible technologies. Well, I would actually argue against that. It's more additive and transformative. So firstly, these mechanisms are still very relevant for energy efficiency measures and other traditional ECMs, because they are not affected by elective pay at all. So even though you may not be able to claim elective pay for that, what that means is that those mechanisms, those technologies are still accessible and relevant. You know, they're not affected by direct pay directly at all. And even if you are interested in using an elective pay eligible technology like a geothermal heat pump or a solar generation or storage, leasing and other third-party ownership mechanisms are still available. You're not forced to use direct pay if you want to use these technologies. And even if you do, there are a lot of strategies that you might be able to employ to use them. You could work out an ownership deal of transferring ownership of an eligible asset from ESCO to a host, and then use proceeds as part of an ESPC payment. You could split contracts between a design bid build or an ESPA sections and figure out how to work it there. You can also ask the ESCO or whoever contracting themselves to consider how direct pay would work. We're actually seeing, as direct pay becomes starts to be used, that cities are integrating direct pay into RFPs and procurement decisions and requiring that contractors make direct pay scenarios and figure out what the economics would be. And so because of all this, just simply by increasing the possibility of direct ownership and affecting the MUSH market in this way, elective pay offers greater leverage for MUSH entities when negotiating these contracts, when negotiating this financing, simply by making the options for renewable generation, for clean vehicles, better for direct ownership. So even if an entity decides not to go down the direct pay route, it's still a possibility, and so may give more leverage, more support in any of these negotiations. And so it's in these ways, elective pay can be additive and transformative to these deals. And so, I've just kind of talked about what the larger general impacts of what elective pay might be. Going into more specific kind of technical opportunities, we are looking at technologies that have not necessarily been the standard checklist, low-hanging fruit options for mush entities for this market. And so, there's a lot of opportunities. There's clean vehicles, which have a potential to be used as ECMs. And interestingly enough, because of different requirements, clean vehicles might be an easier starting out point for folks to use direct pay. So that might be a good place to start in terms of thinking about using elective pay for mush entities, as well as the clean vehicle equipment. Although that only applies to certain areas. So not everyone can use Section 30C. But the combination of clean vehicles and their charging equipment, that can we've seen that starting to be used in certain cases for ESPCs, for other mush procurement, and so that can be a powerful combination there. There's also geothermal heat pumps, which I want to add. Geothermal heat pumps are the only type of heat pump eligible for an elective pay tax credit. There are other heat pumps that are eligible for rebates at and tax credits at the residential level. However, those do not apply for elective pay. So GHPs are the only heat pump eligible for elective pay. But given that GHPs tend to be a little more expensive, just have higher capital costs than other types, that may be a good opportunity here to defray some of these costs. And then finally, we have distributed energy resources. The mush market is no stranger to these technologies. But again, elective pay, as well as associated bonus incentives, can bring these more to the forefront of building performance contracts, of energy savings performance contracts, and particularly distributed resources that have a long history, such as solar PV, and new ones like storage, solar and storage, and microgrids. And so here I put out with the mush sector, what these projects might look like. I won't go through all of them, but I do want to point out in particular the electric school bus possibility. WRI has a really robust electric school bus program, and so there are a lot of opportunities and interest for promoting electric school buses. And with the combination of direct pay as well as the EPA clean school bus program, and other state incentives, electric school buses might be a really, really powerful and good mover for using elective pay and stacking value on top of each other. And then so there are some considerations I just want to bring up. There are domestic content rules, as Amber did mention. They do turn into requirements, and unfortunately, under the ITC and PTC, if you do not meet the domestic content requirements after 2026, your tax credit refund goes to zero. And I know that sounds really scary, but there are potentials for using waivers for non-availability, as well as cost overruns, and projects under 1 megawatt are exempt from these requirements. So, this requirement may be a little tougher for larger projects, but for projects associated with individual office buildings, right, and that may be associated with other energy savings measures, hopefully you won't end up hitting that 1 megawatt mark, and so that direct pay can continue to be a really viable mechanism in that. Also, just emphasizing the bonus incentives, these can add a lot of value, and if there's actually a map of WRI is working on a map for all of the bonus credits, but in particular, there's a map from the from energycommunities.gov for the energy communities, and you might find that areas that you don't expect are energy communities do actually qualify. So it's worth looking at that and seeing if you in one of these projects can qualify for the bonus. And so there are other considerations as well, including that municipal bonds. If you use municipal bonds to finance a project, that can lower the tax credit value you receive by up to 15%. That shouldn't that doesn't take away from a lot of the savings that you can get through elective pay, but it is a thing to look out for, given the importance of municipal bonds in this market. And so kind of bringing it all together for you guys for where do state energy offices come in. There are some really key roles that state energy offices can play. So firstly, states are eligible for elective pay themselves. They can elect for this and use this in their own procurement, in their own deals. They can also provide help to and technical assistance to eligible projects. You know, this is a new kind of unknown process that even if, you know, Treasury and IRS are doing all they can to explain it, and they're doing really well in doing that, there's just hesitancy with a new process. And so as entities who already do provide technical assistance and are eligible themselves, states are in a really interesting position to help as well as lead by example, particularly for entities that don't normally file tax returns. State energy offices can also link elective pay with their existing programs, whether they come from federal or state level or even utility level. And they can work to communicate with applicable entities and share educational materials. So, so, yeah, state energy offices have a really important role in helping folks use elective pay. And so this is just a summary of the general themes of what I wanted to talk about. But in general, I personally believe that elective pay is a really powerful new mechanism that may, you know, disrupt some of the ways that mush market financing has been done, but those barriers are not insurmountable. In fact, there can be a lot of additional and transformative value for folks. So thank you so much. If you have any questions, my email's here, and yeah, I'll pass it back to Eddie.
Thanks, Ian. All right, Neil, take it away.
Okay, let me pull up my report here. Where did I put it? Geez, 1 second here. Nope. Let me pull it up real quick. There we go. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Neil Skyver, and I am the stand-in for Jeff Colm from Bank of America. Hey, he
Neil,
and I worked together for about... Can you see it?
No, not yet.
Screen sharing. Okay, let's see here. Share, there we go. How about this?
Still can't see it.
You got it?
You pull up did you pull up PowerPoint itself?
Yeah, just the PowerPoint, yeah.
You might need to share your other screen if
Yeah, you
you're
just share the PowerPoint screen.
Okay. How about that? I'm not very technical, sorry about that. How's that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Neil, I have it pulled up on my end, so we can just use my screen, and then you can just let me know when to advance the slide.
Thank you, Sam. I'm pretty low tech.
That's okay. We're all set.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Neil Skyver, and I'm like I said, I'm a stand-in for Jeff Combs from Bank of America. But I did work with him for about 17 years. My firm is a consulting firm, and I work with a lot of customers on, well, pretty much these days, pretty much a full-time on the IRA. So Sam, if you want to advance it, that'd be great. So I basically thought about, and thank you, Ian, and Amber for the early introduction. You did a great job. But I come from the finance world, and I pretty much thought of kind of three areas that were, getting some early feedback from from the capital providers. And so the first is, the traditional municipal bond market, geo bonds, revenue bonds. You probably all know that these are long-term financing solutions that you may not be aware, but typically these financial solutions have a what do you call a no-call period, which is if you do a 25 or 30-year bond, the issuer, so the state or the city or the county or the school district, is not able to prepay that bond in any way prior to probably a 7 or 10-year period. So what becomes interesting is if you did a $10 million project and you were going to get $4 million back under the IRA, you may not be able to use that money in this market to pay off the bonds. Typically, typically these bonds are eligible to be prepaid in whole, meaning in their entirety, with no penalty. But there are some bonds that can be prepaid early, and the market extracts a pretty significant premium for that. And so either that premium could be in the so if you said I have a $10 million project, we want to finance it over 30 years or 25 years, and you want the option to prepay $3 or $4 million in year 2 or 3, either that bond would be sold at a premium, so at a higher interest rate, or the prepayment amount would be at a premium instead of a par call. I've talked to a couple of underwriters, in preparing for this, and one option that they suggested was to possibly maybe create a two-tranche section where you have a $7 million bond that's a 25-year bond, and you have a 3-year bond, let's call it, that you price it at at a lower interest rate, but you'd need to pay that off, and you could structure that financing in, based on the expectation of how much of a subsidy that you're expecting to get. And I know Ian talked a bit about third party ownership and all these other things, but I'm talking here about where a state agency or a city or a county is the actual owner of the asset, and they're eligible for the subsidy. And of course, I don't think we talked a lot about it, but the subsidy is not eligible to be paid or received by the customer until after the project is placed in service, after they file their pre-registration process, and after they file their tax return. And the tax return is going to be due, 4.5 months after after their fiscal year. And for governments, a lot of them are June 30 governments, June 30 fiscal years. And I know Amber put up the slide about the calendar year, but a lot of your customers, a lot of your stakeholders have a June 30 fiscal year. And so their filing return is going to be due in November 15th. And that's the earliest date upon which they would be eligible to receive the subsidy after the IRS processes the return. So, we're going to need to factor in, the timing for these things. So I suspect that some issuers that decide to issue long-term bonds are going to decide, hey, you know what, I can just keep that money, reinvest it in another energy project, or reinvest it in in our endowment or something else that might yield a higher return than they're paying on their bonds. So I could see that happening. The other thing in the public market I think is going to be really interesting to watch here is how the rating agencies and the bond community itself looks at this, because they're not used to getting prepaid early in their bond transactions, and they need to borrow $10 million. The rating agency is really going to look to what is the rating aspect of borrowing the 10 million. So that's kind of, my overview on, the traditional municipal products. Maybe Sam will go to the next slide. Okay, so a lot of the ESCO projects, so the ESPC projects, are financed with in a direct, under what's called a direct lending. That's a financing solution directly between the municipal host customer and a financial institution. A lot of times these are done as tax-exempt lease purchases or direct placement bonds. The news is they don't really have to deal with the rating agencies, because those particular transactions are generally not rated. The parties that are involved in these transactions, I might have skipped over that in the muni bond section, but there's typically a lot of the same parties, right? Municipal advisors, placement agents, bond counsel. There's a lot of folks involved in the finance team. The lenders themselves are generally large banks or regional banks that or other institutional investors that look to lend in these markets, and they're not as worried about prepayment options as a traditional municipal bond market. They're allowed, they have mechanisms within their pricing and treasury operations to be able to accept early prepayments of deals. And so there's kind of two options here. One is that they could negotiate in, let's say the host customer does an ESCO project, and they have a bunch of solar and battery storage and geothermal heat pump projects that they're going to maybe take them 2 years to install, right? Because you're going to apply only at the end of each fiscal year for your cash subsidy. So you could negotiate in with your lender the option to partially prepay a portion of the loan, 1 or 2 times, or maybe 3 times. And there are kind of two options here. One is that the lender could charge a premium for that, right? So like I described in the municipal bond world, they are able to prepay those bonds with no penalty or no prepayment penalty. But typically banks are going to want to see some sort of prepayment penalty, say 102% or 103%, or a 2 or 3% premium for that. The other thing is that I talked to a lender this morning about is that because they're underwriting the loans based on the energy savings of an ESPC project for 20 years or whatever, that maybe what they'll do is they'll say, hey, if you prepay me, I won't charge you a premium, but what I'll do is I'll shorten the term of the loan. So maybe you had a 20-year loan, and if we could, get that $3 or $4 million in, it maybe turns it into a 16-year loan. That has the effect of boosting their yield a little bit, and getting their what they thought was a 20-year repayment term, knocked down a little bit and play a little bit in the yield curve. although that's exciting these days. So those are the kind of two options there. I've talked to Lenders Council quite a bit about this, and they're basically advising against a lender taking a lien, on this cash subsidy. It's because it's really up to the customer to decide if they're going to, apply for the subsidy. They got to rely on the ESCO or the contractor to build it. And then, the banks don't really want to underwrite that risk. But secondarily, there's a tax issue relating to federal government guarantees of payments that are due under a tax exempt financing. So not to bore you guys with that very much, but in case anybody's interested, I have lots of information on that. Sam, let's go to the third slide, and then I'll be done. So because the actual subsidy itself isn't going to come in until the project is contracted, built, placed in service, and then through this, process of the pre-registration and then the filing, it might take 2 years, 3 years to actually get their money. So there's beginning to develop a business of doing some interim construction financing, under which the lender actually bridge loans the that portion of the project that is related to the subsidy. There are banks and other type of non-bank private lenders and other lenders that are doing that, but it's expensive. So if an underwriter is going to underwrite the contract, the ESCO, the actual performance, the actual construction of the project, and then the actual receipt of the tax credit, that's going to be expensive. But there are I think certain opportunities where that may make sense. And so with that, I'll stand for any questions. These are kind of the three big approaches that are going on right now. Obviously, no cash subsidies have been paid yet, and so it's just taking a little while, and everybody's kind of trying to develop this on the fly as it goes. So thank you again, Sam, for handling my IT.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you to all of our presenters today, Ian and Amber and Neil. We have kind of limited time, and so I wanted to get into a couple of questions that were left in the chat box. We have about 7 minutes or so maybe we can hit a few of them. The first question is from Lisa, and I think this was directed towards Amber. Can you describe what goes into determining your tax year? Is it not simply the year during which the project was placed in service?
Yeah, so this is something that the proposed regulations specify. There's a provision in section 441 of the tax code that explains what a tax year is. So you can figure out if you're on a fiscal year or on a calendar year. I think Neil mentioned a lot of you guys might be on a fiscal year.
Okay, great. Thank you. Eric Friedman has a few questions in here, and I think these could be answered by any of you, maybe to Ian. Since non-taxable entities may have difficulty floating an amount equal to the credit payments for months after the project is placed into service, could they still be eligible for direct pay if they get a grant or loan that provides 100% of the project cost that acts as a bridge until they receive the credit payment and then pay back the amount received to the entity providing the grant or loan?
So I feel like I might be the best one to answer this. So the special rule for tax exempt grants and forgivable loans was a special rule because generally a tax exempt grant or forgivable loan wouldn't go towards the basis of the property. So then if you had that grant or forgivable loan, you wouldn't get as much of a tax credit because the tax credit is a percentage of basis. So it's up to 70% of the basis if you meet all the bonuses for section 48 or 45. So In this example, it sounds like this grant, so I'll split it. For the grant, assuming the grant was given for the purpose of buying something, sounds like it might be. It's interesting. The first example we put in the regulations is where the EPA gave the person $400,000 for the bus. And in that case, they wouldn't get any $40,000 credit because the bus is already fully paid for. So I think there the example would kick in where you can't get the restricted tax exempt amount plus the credit be more than the cost of the thing. On the loan side, it's not clear if this is a forgivable loan or you're just paying back a loan. I think, you know, our special rule was for forgivable loans because those aren't paid back. In the general loan scenario, I don't think you need any special rules, just the general, you know, that you've got a loan, that's your money kind of rule applies. So the tax exempt bond thing, though, is slightly different, like Ian said. So if you use a tax exempt bond, there's a 15% reduction. I want to think about that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amber. So our next question is also from Eric, and this is a follow-up for the nuclear plant credit. Does that credit also apply to micro-nuclear systems?
So it looks like there's a couple questions here dealing with specific credits that I'm not, you know, well versed in all 12 of the credits. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person to ask. I don't know if Neil or Ian knows more about the specifics of those credits.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in the nuclear power credit, and I am happy somebody is challenging that. I thought nobody would go for that, but if somebody wants to do micronuclear as part of this, I'm all for that. I can't speak to that, but what I can speak to is a little bit is the geothermal. So I'm actually going to share this in the chat. Climate Master actually has a great resource on commercial geothermal heat pumps that they released for the IRA. So that should be able to answer some of these more specific questions about what exactly it covers. I'm not an expert on the geothermal heat pump side, but that I know where to direct you to.
Yeah, I think for these three questions, if you want to know about nuclear power plants, you would read section 45U. If you want to know about alternative vehicle refueling, you look at section 30C. I just checked, there's no regulations under there. So that's where you get your answer, or from a tax professional.
Okay, that sounds good. So is that addressing that last question in there, Amber, regarding the alternative fuel vehicle refueling property credit?
Yeah, I mean, you can read the definition of what qualifies in the statute.
Okay, well, that sounds good. We are getting close to the end. I did have one additional question for the panel, just because I'm also curious. What do you recommend public entities begin doing as they prepare to claim tax credits under the direct pay? How should they start that preparation, do you think?
I think we're kind of exploring this in our roadmap preparation. I think part of what folks can do is simply start learning about what direct pay is. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about how this mechanism is going to work, just simply because it's new. So looking at the IRS and Treasury resources, I think, are fantastic. And then secondly, start looking at your capital improvement plans, at your future plans for potentially like EV charging at your municipal buildings. Look at what you are doing and try to identify these opportunities where direct pay might fit in, and potentially make something more economical or expand on the ambition of a project. So I think as we're waiting to get this guidance finalized and have this certainty about what to do, I think just learning and considering where this fits into your own portfolio, your own actions, I think is really the first step. And also have all your documents ready. Just have all the documents you can, keep records of everything. Especially, you know, I'm sure we've all dealt with the IRS on our own time. So we know that will apply. Definitely those types of requirements might apply to, you know, this process.
So Robin, I've got a great answer for your question. And that is, I think that a lot of these municipal government customers should reach out to consultants and others who are familiar with this area. And it's my own infomercial here, but I find that it takes a lot of stakeholder engagement and education, and because things like when the final regs are issued and the IRS portal begins to be opened, and that these local government customers are going to have to, they're the owner of the projects, they're going to have to submit these pre-registration filings, and they're going to have to submit those under Treasury, right? They're wrestling with, who can I get at our organization to take the lead on this? Is it the Public Works Department or the Finance Department? And who is going to be authorized to file these forms if they don't file the forms now? And then, if we're crying out loud, when the actual 990 forms need to go out, those are going to be like real live IRS filings, and these people are just not familiar with it. And Ian did a great job of describing how these projects can be incorporated into ESPC projects and others, but they're just not familiar with it at all. And the roadmap, I'm excited to see you guys are putting that out, Ian, and what Treasury's put out is really, really helpful, but still they just don't understand it.
Yeah, I want to, sorry, Neil, I just want to, not to steal your thunder, I want to second everything that you're saying, and particularly, given this audience of state energy offices, I think state energy offices are in a really great position to help municipalities as well as nonprofits, the MUSH sector, in with this, given that it's just, it's a new process. People are going to need help, even if Treasury and IRS, I think, are doing a great job of explaining it and making it simpler. It's just people have this hesitation, and so state energy offices are great, not just for, they can provide the TA and the help and knowledge of the state local context. They can also lead by example and show how the direct pay can fit into their own procurement, their own projects, and how that works for them. So just seconding everything that Neil was saying, and saying that this audience, I think folks here have a very, can play an important role in getting this mechanism out there for folks.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We are at the end of our hour. This has really been helpful. I know for myself, so for the Montana State Energy Office, I'm sure for everyone as well. So thank you guys again for your time today. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.